So I'm thrilled to have me stop talking and welcome Dr. Amanda Freeman. We're really excited to work with her. She is Associate Professor of Sociology and Criminal Justice at the University of Hartford. We sent around her biography, but I really want to just highlight that she was the co-recipient of a Presidential Award for Early Career Scholars from the Russell Sage Foundation. And she's also won the Dentler Award from the Public Sociology section of the American Sociological Association in recognition of exceptional research and writing on the challenges facing low-income single mother-headed families and communication of research and its policy implications to a broader audience, meaning that you can read her in places like The Atlantic. Very cool. So we're thrilled to have Dr. Freeman here. If you can pick up her fabulous book, Getting Me Cheap, How Low Wage Work Traps Women and Girls in Poverty, this is going to be, I think, a really important text going forward, and I hope that you all will get your copies of it. So I'll put it up where you can actually see it. So thank you so much, Amanda.
There we go. You're all set.
I mean, I think it's perfect because so much of what I have to say dovetails with what Jenny was talking about for sure. So as a qualitative researcher, it's really exciting to be able to share my findings with people who are kind of working on the ground with these populations. Anything that I share today, I'm happy to share the PowerPoint. I think this is making me also responsible to admit people, maybe. That's okay.
I got it.
We got it. No worries.
So feel free to, I don't mind sharing the PowerPoint. Also, you can contact me. I'm responsive by email, so I put my email on there. I'm going to basically share an overview of some research projects that I've done. They're basically an aggregation of data from interviews and focus groups from roughly 2012 to 2021. Let's see. So all of our participants, it's a requirement to be mothers of dependent children. They self-report as low income. Basically, the way we define that in terms of research is being in receipt of at least one public benefit. And through all the samples, roughly 80% of them are single parents. I generally work in collaborations with nonprofit organizations, probably like where a lot of you are coming from. So I had interview data that was collected in Boston from 2009 to 2012, and that was with the Crittenton Women's Union. We had focus group data collected in Colorado, Georgia, Massachusetts in 2015, 2016, and that was in collaboration with 9 to 5, which many of you may have heard of. And then actually, because you so nicely mentioned my book that came out last year, the publisher actually was asking for more information about the impact of the pandemic, which I know Aurora has done a lot of work on the impact of the pandemic. We basically added phone interviews because at the time that was, the easiest way to do it. It was actually difficult to add Zoom because, as we all know, not everyone has access to those technological resources. So we added some phone interviews and basically just talking about some of these themes that emerged. I mean, really looking for critical views from the moms about how they're navigating work systems, how they're navigating school. Many of them are working and going to school at the same time. And then also how they're navigating public benefit programs. Oh, no. I always like to just start out by saying, I don't know how to turn off that dinging. That's my email. Though it's, I think we all know, and I sort of saw the pictures probably skew female in terms of who's watching right now. Care work responsibilities drive inequality. This is true globally, right? I think it's underpinning this whole conversation that we're having. So I think it's important to just remember all over the world, women are responsible for almost 80% of unpaid care work, right? So this doesn't have to be mothering, but it does include domestic labor. It includes care for your neighbor, care for elderly family members, tends to fall to women, right? According to the International Labor Organization, women perform 4 hours and 25 minutes of unpaid care work per day versus 1 hour, 23 minutes for men. So of course, this is time. I mean, we all feel a time crunch, right? That's taken away from school and work. In the United States, we actually do a little better, but women still spend 37% more time on housework, care work than men. And this work generally doesn't have economic value. So that's where we got our title, Getting Me Cheap. So the real issue here is combining that care work, which is an immense responsibility, with what tended to be crappy jobs and trying to go to school, right? So many of the women we spoke with were forced to work night shifts, shifts outside the traditional 9 to 5, and that tends to be when daycare is open, right? We talked to some people who had access to 24-hour daycare, but very rare, right? Also, much more difficult to meet childcare needs with friends and family because they may also be struggling, right? For affluent women, I think also these struggles exist clearly, but affluent women tend to buy care, right? Because that's available to them. The workplaces where low-income women tend to be employed often don't offer benefits like sick leave, parental leave, or flex time, which we all know is necessary to be involved, right? To take your kids to the doctor, the dentist, to go to the parent-teacher conference, etc. So here I'm just, and lack of childcare being really central here. I linked to an article that we had about a nationwide article about different universal pre-K efforts nationwide, just in case that's of interest to you. Okay, so first I did link to those Atlantic articles. I do try as a scholar, I think, to, the academic journal articles are important, but they also don't reach the same population. So I try to couple, when I have an academic journal article, a more accessible news kind of article. But this article is from the Journal of Women and Gender in Higher Education, and really talking about the experience of this cohort of, I think, 60 women pursuing higher education at all different institutions in the city of Boston, but they were part of a program to support them. So of course, this is a selective sample, but I always say, the women who are the most supported when they're having these kind of obstacles, struggles, and difficulties, I think we have to pay even more attention, right? Because if then you think of the general population who doesn't have that kind of support, and that's going to be even more exacerbated. Just some general, we know education or higher education is one of the most effective ways to move out of poverty. Those who earn a bachelor's degree earn an average of 65% more than those who earn a high school diploma. This study, which I'm happy to point people to from CUNY, of 158, small sample, but I think really meaningful, single mother college students, found that 100% of those who earned a 4-year degree within 10 years stopped relying on public benefit programs. That was true for 81%, sorry, of those who earned associate's degrees. I also have some previous research I linked here. I know sometimes it's actually hard to get the full text of those journal articles, so I was trying to link, so if you wanted to use them. Also shows that moms pursuing higher education is beneficial for kids. It's also beneficial for bond with their kids, right? However, I think Jenny also mentioned student parents are 1/4 of the total undergraduate population in the United States. All of the mothers that we talked to believed that they could get a college degree and that would help move their families out of poverty, right? At the same time, less than 5% of parenting students are attaining a bachelor's degree within 6 years. So this statistic is a little bit misleading because it's including anyone who signs up, right? So some students enroll and then don't attend. But I think what it really shows is that, within 6 years, maybe this is not even a realistic time frame for someone who's parenting and working and going to school. And then also just really showing the lack of support, I think, for parenting students at most college and universities nationwide. We know that single mothers, especially attending college, tend to be marginalized. They face a chilly climate. Common obstacles in the literature, financial insecurity, lack of free time, lack of reliable childcare. And of course, this really varies across the United States, but there are some commonalities. I would also just bring up, invisibility is a big sticking point in this population. We don't really have a systematic way of identifying parenting students, right? So I guess the best we have probably is checking the box on the FAFSA, which is not publicly available data. I mean, sometimes you're able to get that data. And so if students want to be invisible and hide their parenting status, they are able. And of course, that makes it more difficult for teachers, for administrators, for people working in the community to, identify them and provide services to them. In this article, we kind of added some sort of lesser talked about or known obstacles that we found. We found real kind of lack of centralized career guidance and even just knowledge about how college systems worked. And this is often happening, right? It makes some sense. If you grow up in a neighborhood or in a family where nobody went to college, right? You're just not going to intuitively know. You're not going to be kind of slotted into all of these different programs that are going to teach you the ins and outs of applications and scholarship applications and loans and all the different things. I mean, I feel often like you have to be a rocket scientist to figure these kind of things out. So what we found were really frequent changes in job tracks, in majors, and career interests. Several of the mothers talked in their interviews about not finishing short-term skills programs. So I'll just read you a few of the quotes. I went to college for about 4 years at this university. Then I left to go to a school for beauty and aesthetics to become an esthetician. Now I'm back in school. I'm interested in criminal justice, thinking of becoming a probation officer. So this person had spent more than 4 years taking classes. And I have to say overall, I want to say 70 or 80% of the moms we talked to, and again, it's certainly a cream sample, were really good students. I mean, getting A's and B's, but not coming out of it with any kind of a degree. Other people did trainings like for things like GI, phlebotomy, but didn't get their certification, right? So, you can put a lot into a class, and spend the time, but if you don't come out with the credential, it's not as helpful to you, of course. A lot of them talked about taking advantage of the best opportunity that they had right now because there's such financial stress on their families, right? So they might take advantage of educational opportunities even if they're not really what they want to do. So this study actually talked to women 3 years in a row. So this one participant, Emma, I remember her saying she really wanted to get into a nursing program. She was actually very close to getting in. Then it had closed. So she decided she had the opportunity to go for an associate's in surgical tech. She did that. But she kept like coming back year after year and then saying, well, I'm just still applying to the RN. So by the 3rd year, she had almost completed the associates, but wasn't even sure if she was going to get it because she was still trying to get into the nursing program because that's what she had really wanted to do. Also, we see a lot of difficulty transitioning. So low-income parenting students are 3 times more likely to stop out because there might be family emergencies happening or to transfer schools at least once. all of the women that we spoke with who had transferred had lost credits. And as a professor, I see this all the time. And many of them didn't understand it was a possibility that this was going to happen, right? So one of them said, when I first got to a new school, I was so upset because I had already taken some classes. Now I had to take them over. Many of the mothers were unaware that they were earning, what turned out to be non-transferable standalone degrees that were not accredited, or not understanding the difference between a certificate and like an associate's degree, for instance. We saw a lot of inflexibility in the institutions. I mean, when it comes down to it, even though we see such an overwhelming increase in the number of non-traditional students amongst all students pursuing bachelor's degrees, college is still generally set up for, straight from high school students who are supported by their parents, right? So we saw very little help arranging childcare. There's a lot of athletes, for instance, that receive priority registration, and not that they shouldn't, but parenting students are generally not getting priority registration or extra help managing their schedules around childcare. Many of the degree programs or scholarship programs were only allowing students who attended full time, which is much more difficult for students who have children. An example, Lila struggled with depression. I mean, she was a 4.0 student from when I met her, but she was taking a long time to complete her degree program. She had kids that had learning difficulties themselves. She was juggling a lot. She was also working, and she eventually was just dropped by her scholarship program because of the length of time it was taking. Another student said, I don't feel really supported. I'm coming in as a non-traditional student, and I didn't realize how much you just have to do on your own. Like, there's no one to help. So, of course, a remedy would be increased institutional flexibility, which I'm sure we all know is more difficult than you might think. I would say the first step to becoming more parent-friendly is that educational institutions have to be aware of the presence of parenting students and the specific needs of low-income and parenting students. So I spent several years on the board for National Center for Student Parents. This actually has evolved into a partnership with the Urban Institute. It's called the Spark Collaborative, and there's several other organizations, really great toolkits for community organizations, for colleges to assess, to identify, and then to try to address the needs of low-income parenting students. I don't know what I do. One thing that was kind of an overlap between students attending college that we saw and students who were just working was this real difficulty in receiving public benefits. So I have observed this as a professor for, gosh, I guess a long time, 15, 20 years now. Students who are trying to, for instance, maintain a child care voucher or to receive cash assistance while they're in school. I mean, since welfare reform, of course, this varies by state, but it's become much more difficult. And just talking about how they're spending an inordinate amount of time with this processing of public benefits. Many express confusion about the way school hours could count toward a child care voucher. I can recall at least 3 women who had lost a child care voucher right before the start of the semester. Several of them, because they're connected to a community organization, were able to receive legal assistance and help. But as we all know, that takes a long time, right? So generally in those cases, they're not able to actually attend during that semester, and then they wind up having to wait. Okay, so switching over a little bit, this is a slightly different sample. So went from a journal article into the book that got mentioned. So I will tell you that it's coming in paperback relatively soon. So I know the hardcover is always more expensive, but if you're interested, you might wait for the paperback. Just an insider tip. But so this sample included parents who are working, receiving public benefits. And I would say roughly, I don't think I got to that, All of them were working, and roughly half were also pursuing school or skills training. We actually had several women in the sample who were working in apprenticeships, so to get into the trades. But many of the same themes were emerging. So kind of like, where were they working? Most participants were in service sector jobs, domestic labor jobs. So just as a reminder, these tend to be jobs where you can be working full time. If you have children, you're also receiving public benefits. So Walmart and McDonald's employ the most recipients of public benefits, but also in that top 25, Kroger, Amazon, the dollar store. It's an important reminder. I think the average childcare worker in the United States makes around $10 an hour, and 95% of childcare workers are women. So that leaves 1 in 7 of them living in poverty. And they also had the same, I think this was one of the themes that was somewhat surprising to us, a view of public assistance just as disruption. So really disrupting of their efforts to create stability and causing their family stress, which is counter to, of course, these programs are designed to actually help and build bridges between these times of economic stress and then, things getting better. A mother of one daughter in public housing in Boston had to actually stop looking for work because she just said, the most important thing for her family, because they had become homeless, was to find housing. And the time that was required to fill out all the applications. I mean, she also wanted to enroll in the mortgage lottery. It was just so intensive. So she was just going to the library and doing that every single day. Many of the benefit programs were also just not supportive of parenting. And there was a lot of difficulty coordinating between the programs. So in Colorado and Massachusetts, we heard from participants that there would be required meetings and no accommodation for a babysitter. They were also not allowed to bring children. And, many of the women are receiving more than one benefit program. So in Colorado, we heard from a few people that the meeting for the child care voucher, which is mandatory, was across town and almost always held at the same time as the meeting that you had to go to receive TANF for cash assistance. So this one mother was just saying, they told me I had to make a choice. So, overall, just looking at all these ways in which work and care are conflicting for these parents. Several parents spoke of having to leave the kids on their own because they either had to go to work early or stay late. This mom was talking about her overnight job was over at 7:30, but her daughter, who she'd entered in a charter school lottery, was not eligible for the bus because they lived outside of the bus radius. And so she was always trying to sneak out of school, not get in trouble, and then make her daughter not get in trouble and be late for school. And she just felt like continuous guilt about this. Another mom in a Massachusetts focus group was talking about her daughter had autism, but it seemed like the only thing possible was for her to wait for the bus by herself, even though the mom was just really feeling like it wasn't a safe arrangement and she was nervous about it every day. But she just said she had, they were relying on her paycheck. I think a lot of parents identify with when your child is sick. I mean, I always feel like, what is February vacation, right? Nobody else gets February vacation. The kids are off for a whole week. You're often required to go to meetings at schools. So, one mom was saying, I lost a job because of school breaks. You have to take off a whole day to talk to teachers. We heard from several mothers about going to work ill. And often they worked in food services, right? But they really felt like they had to save their sick days for their children, and they couldn't afford to lose the earnings. So one mom said in an interview, an issue I have to think about now, especially being single, is sick days, because I don't have sick days at work. I will say that often, I mean, depending on the state and the circumstance, we would come back in that conversation and try to provide information about, if the employer doesn't necessarily have sick days, maybe they're accessible through the state. But often the women felt like The jobs were so precarious. This was not something that they had the power or agency to push for at work. Often we found a lot of piecing together of part-time work also, so it was more complicated to access benefits, even if they were available at that job site. Many of the moms reported this kind of on-call scheduling, so they didn't know their schedule in advance, which is so difficult with childcare, right? Parents reported being fired for leaving to pick children up early, and for not immediately being able to change work hours due to childcare. And I just want to say, I mean, all of the women we spoke with said their kids were their priority, which I think is very understandable. And in our society is generally lauded, but not in terms of trying to manage a low wage job at the same time. Fully 60% of parents in Georgia focus groups said they lost a job specifically due to problems with or lack of childcare. And I would just say probably the most surprising theme that came through for me was that a lot of the women in terms of school and work used hiding their children as a strategy. So many of them were saying, if you get hired and you're a parent, you just can't let them know that you have kids. So one mother was recounting a story about hiding photos of her children. Students were talking about not wanting people in class to know that they had children. I think because of this idea that then maybe they would be thought of as slacking off or unavailable, not reliable or dependable. Several mothers talked about physically hiding their children at work or taking them with them to class because they felt like that was the only way they could not fail in terms of school and work and then also keep an eye on their kids. So I think that the book actually opens with a story about a mom hiding her daughter in a bread rack at ShopRite. Which I think like from the outside, you might think, oh my God, that's dangerous, right? But she really felt like that was the only thing that she could do, right? To keep an eye on her kid and to try not to lose her job. Okay, wrapping up.
Okay.
So, I think sociologists often kind of unpack social problems and talk about how terrible things are. So I try to leave with kind of levels of action. What can we do? I think a lot of people here are seeking grant funding to try to make changes and support these kind of students and workers. I always just say on an individual level, kind of examining your support for low-income mothers in your own work and life. Do you employ babysitters? Do you have people who come in cleaning your house? Listening to how best you can support them. I mean, there are many, like Hand in Hand is one that comes to mind, right? Organizations that allow for an alliance between the worker and, the people who are employing them to advocate for domestic workers' bill of rights, for instance. And then workplace and school level, I'll just use an example from where I work at the University of Hartford. There are often different policies for salaried workers versus hourly workers, right? This is true at big companies. Several companies have been called out for this. Starbucks, McDonald's. At the University of Hartford, like in terms of parental leave, this is pre-Connecticut parental leave. There's a different policy, less number of weeks for staff, right, than faculty and administrators. The same is true. I talk about a longer example at UMass Amherst in the book. And then, of course, just federal and state policies, asking not only what policies are being proposed, but how they impact people on different income levels. I mean, I always talk about this in terms of FMLA. Great policy, but if you can't afford to go without pay, right, it's a totally different policy in terms of availability to you. We've had no change in the federal minimum wage in 13 years. And despite really widespread public support for paid parental leave and universal childcare, we haven't seen any federal action. So please feel free to use any of my, I mean, qualitative research through stories, I think is really great often to buffet statistical data that you're using in your grant applications and, you know, any writing that you're doing. So I would feel free to reach out to me. Any of my research projects, I would love to make available to you. Thank you.
Questions about the grant process, or maybe if you have questions for Amanda about her research.
Amanda, thank you so much for presenting that your backed up data. So this is something I think that the majority of us who are working with these students see on a daily basis, but then it's very difficult for us to support it because we don't have that data in the background. So, you know, everything that you have shared has pretty much supported everything that I see on my side. I'd love to read your book, and, you know, anything that you can share as far as links, that would be super helpful, because I use that information when I go to my executive team to let them know that this is why what we do is very important.
Yes, thank you so much. I just found the chat, of course. So thank you to everybody. No, I agree. I mean, I think in terms of grant applications, I've done a few myself. I think being able to support kind of data sets with some anecdotal information, and then also qualitative research, you know, I always make sure to use NVivo or some kind of qualitative database, because I do find that in terms of funders and policymakers, it gives some kind of official, right? The idea that the coding is being done officially, the data sets are being aggregated, even though it's qualitative data, so it's really gleaned from talking and looking over transcripts. Yes, so I think it's important to share those resources. I know sometimes there are these paywalls up, especially for academic journal articles. So yes, happy to help in any way I can.
And we've got a couple of questions in the chat. So Elizabeth asked, what is the typical grant amount that applicants ask for and are awarded? I would say our range is between $10,000 and $25,000 per program. Yeah, and I mean, people can ask for much more, but we don't have it. So, you know. And then Laura is asking, is there going to be a formal RFP issued, or will there be? You know, we can look at providing an example of a successful letter of intent. I don't think we don't have a formal RFP to share, but we could share the final grant proposal or some of the questions from it. We could definitely do that.
Answered. Great. Look at that, 10:57. We are try to be very respectful of everyone's time. Thank you all so much for coming, and I'll be sending out the recording and all the links after the meeting. Thanks so much.
Thank you to our grants committee members who tuned in today, and our board members, and all our fabulous community partners. Thank you all so much.